Keith. I work at Wieden & Kennedy in a group called The Lodge. We are kind of a creative tech group inside of an advertising agency. So we do a little bit different work than most of the rest of our group does. And last year I had this idea that came to me on the bus on my way to work, and I have some thoughts about it that I'd like to share with you guys. And so I kind of use the API acronym to make a play on it. But what I want to talk to you about is the way we can apply sort of like a hacker or coder mentality to getting our voice out into the community and changing things. And that's why I call this application protesting interface. And I'll just apologize ahead of time. This is Python, so I'm sorry if anyone is upset by that. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, so cool. We are a nation that is born of protest, right? Like, that is where everything came from. We kicked it off by destroying the king's property and then telling him to go screw himself. Then we wrote a document called the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence that kind of justified everything that we did after the fact, which is great. And that document kind of said, you know, we reserve the right to disagree with you and tell you about it, which is awesome. The problem is the framers didn't have Google, and that was a long time ago. And where we're at now is a very different place than where we were at then. And then, you know, they didn't have the capacity for exchanging information that we have or learning information that we have. That's why we have such a thing as like the media cycle. That's why our president's always going on about fake news, and the cycle of information turns so fast now that the rules and the procedures that they wrote 300 years ago or 250 years ago couldn't have accounted for where we're at now, basically. So, yeah, what they kind of envisioned was this thing I'm thinking of as like an N-to-one-to-one interaction, right? So you get a number of people, N people, in one place, and you pick one target. That target could be the boat that was full of tea in Boston. That could be a battlefield. That could be a building or a political entity. It could be a person. But the idea was that the way that you organize change was to get a bunch of people together and go at them. And so this was their idea, and the problem, as this graphic kind of illustrates, is that there's some really physical and violent consequences that can occur to like going and doing this, especially back then. Nowadays things are a tad more civilized, although arguably still problematic. And not really beneficial to the protester. So this idea, though, of N-to-one-to-one political interaction still exists today, and we see it all the time. We've seen it in Baltimore, we've seen it in Ferguson, we've seen it in Portland. So it's not that it's deprecated or dead. It's just it is one form of political interaction that's been around for a long time. Another kind is this thing as a one-to-one-to-one interaction. So this would be like you calling your congressperson. This is what we get told over and over again. If you have a problem, call your congressperson. You have one person, one phone, one congressperson. This is a direct line of communication between two people. And this is great, but the problem is that it's not consistent with where we're at in terms of information exchange. Again, going back to the earlier point about they didn't have Google when they set this up. I mean, this idea is only as old as telephones are, which are about 100 years old, maybe. So we're going to hard cut to 2017, where everyone's living on their mobile devices. No one's actually out and about. We live more isolated than we have in the past. And it's because we can get all the information we need 5 minutes within waking up. And it turns out there's some studies done by companies like Deloitte that have verified or demonstrated that most people, most average Americans within ages of like 18 to 35, check their phones within 5 minutes of waking up. And beyond that, social and IM apps are the most preferred, whereas the phone, the actual phone, app is probably about 6 in the order of things that people actually use on their phone. So when we're told that if you have a problem with your congressperson or with what's going on in your locality or your country, you should call your congressperson, what they're saying is don't do anything, because it's not what we do. It's not how we act. And so I'm going to take a harder cut now to 2016, because we had a really fucking bad year. Pardon my French. We had a bad year last year. And this is, yeah, we saw this more often than not. The end to one-to-one protest happened over and over again for terrible reasons. And it was just a couple months before we elected a Cheeto as our president, where a man was reading a book in his car waiting for his son to get out of school, and he was called out of his car by police and shot dead. And that man was Keith Lamont Scott in North Carolina. And I remember waking up, and I didn't read the news, but I read the email chain. Our company is very vocal about these kind of injustices that happen all over the country all the time. And as I was sitting on the bus, I kept reading and reading and reading about this. And the thing that hit me really hard was that I didn't want to be on the bus. I wanted to have a sign. I wanted to be in the middle of the street, and I wanted to be stopping traffic, telling people to wake the fuck up. Which is like a one-to-end protest, I guess, because it would be me in the middle of the street, like one person, one location, trying to affect many people at once, right? And I didn't do it, partially because I was like on the way to work, and I was like, well, I don't have a sign, and really what I didn't want to do was interrupt you. Like, everyone else has lives too. I wanted to interrupt someone who could actually like attack the problem. And my muse at the time wasn't Guy Fawkes either. It was Mr. Robot, which I had been binge watching like the week prior, so it was perfect timing. And so the first thought that came into my head after that was distributed denial of service. Like, how do I disrupt Congress? How do I disrupt people that can make a difference most effectively? And this is what I'm now considering what I'm calling a one-to-end-to-one political interaction, where I'm taking my intelligence and like what I can do, and I'm distributing that attack out to point back at one target. And my target in this case was Congress's phone tree. And since my generation uses Twitter the most, that was where I chose to fight this battle. And so this is what I'm kind of getting at here, is this one-to-end-to-one interaction. And so walking to the office, I hashed a plan. I was like, oh, I feel like these are public servants. They must have their phone numbers somewhere. Like, I have to be able to get those phone numbers. Turns out they're all over the place. And I could write a Python script really fast to scrape web pages and get all those phone numbers and those names and those locations out. So I could then target a zip code and target people and target their phone numbers. Turns out there's also a really dope API called that's made by the Sunlight Foundation, where you can just put in a zip code and it'll return information. I found that out later and refactored, but this is me on my way to work, okay? And Twilio is really dope at calling people, so that's what it's all built on. And then Twitter, obviously, is where I'm going to get that information. So my first step was to listen to Twitter with a Python app. And again, the only reason I use Python is because that's the language I've been using forever. Love and respect JavaScript. Sorry. And I did a little work. So I cleaned up some tweets. I took my own references out, self-references. Those cause nasty loops that never end. And I also didn't want any kind of racist stuff getting through. So I used the profanity filter to get that stuff out. And then I would queue that up into a Redis queue. And the reason I used a Redis queue to buffer all these messages is because of the fact that I was working with my team internally to do it, and we have legal considerations to make, and if we actually kind of got busted for flooding and busting up Congress's phone tree, that would be bad, so we had to like actually pace the call frequency a little bit. Wasn't my choice. And then I had a Python worker that would pop off those messages and send them back to Twilio. the Twilio app, the Twilio interfaces with Flask to return what they call TWIML, which is like their markup to basically translate text and action into a phone call. I would pass that back to Twilio, and then it would make a call to Congress. So the result was this Heroku app that basically had a web application that served the TWIML, a listener that was listening to Twitter to like pull people's tweets at my bot, and then a worker that was serving up information to Twilio that would then go and make these phone calls to Congress. And the way I did it was I said, anytime this happens, I'm going to find your zip code, and I'm going to target the 2 senators and the congressional representative who work for your district, and I'm going to call them. And this is what it looked like. Basically, you could just tweet at it, and it would actually take that tweet and read it in some kind of weird robo voice to a random person. So in this case, it's Alma Adams. And that was my way of acting, and that took 4 hours to do that. It took like 24 hours to get through the legal hurdles because I did involve my workplace. I couldn't afford to incur the cost myself. But the code took 4 hours. And there were totally like upsides to what I did and downsides. And I'm the first to acknowledge that. And the scales of justice are my metaphor for how all this falls out. Like the downside, I have no idea what happened. I have no idea if the calls were picked up or if they picked up and then just hung up, if it had any impact whatsoever, because that's not information that I can get except by actually contacting those people and be like, hey, I'm the one blowing up your phone tree. Can you tell me how it went? But the upside to me was that in the moment when I was in the mode of like getting like some action, some piece of information out there, it was a really easy way to do it. And it was a very quick way to do it. And that's because I didn't write the thousands of lines of code that make Twilio work. And I didn't write the thousands of lines of code that make Twitter work. They expose APIs to us. We can consume them. And so to me, did I go backwards? My bad. To me, that's what API, the whole application protest interface means, is that we live in an era, we live in an age right now where you only have to write 144 lines of code to do something that can impact the national discourse. And I think that we need to, as a community, as a development community, it's kind of on us. This is our tool that my parents can't use and your parents probably can't use, that we can use to actually distribute our voice amongst other people who feel the same. People in rural communities, people who don't live in access to this ability to like go to Washington or go to Chicago or go to Portland or wherever they are from and they want to go. We can distribute that voice for them using technology. And so that's why I wanted to come and talk about this to you guys today, because I think that as denizens of this community, we have an ability and perhaps a responsibility to do that. It depends on your viewpoint. So that's that. I'm going to make a shameless plug for my team, because we are, that's Tara and Nate. They're here. You can find them back there. I wanted to show you their faces so you wouldn't have to like look at everyone's name tags super closely and get really awkward about that. But I couldn't have done this without the team that I work with. I told them the idea, they believed in it and let me run with it, even though I had other work to do. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that, and that we are always looking for UX thinkers, designers, developers to come work with us and share our enjoyment of like exploring random things like drones and robots and bots and VR and whatnot. So that's all, and I have a one to do, and it's just say thanks. So thanks everyone, that was cool.